the delegates met up in Philadelphia and proceeded to do two things, which, if done today, would have every American citizen, special interest, institution, and the news media screaming at the tops of their lungs. First, they undertook their efforts in absolute secrecy. And second, they completely scrapped their assignment and instead, on their own hook, decided to design an entirely new form of government, the Constitution. Could you imagine that today?
The Constitutional Convention was conducted behind closed doors, a secret meeting where the delegates were convinced at the outset that they could not do the business of creating either amendments to the Articles of Confederation or a new Constitution in the open, with newspaper reporters coming in and out and citizens coming in and out. And I think in major part it was done because the delegates recognized early on that what they were going to do was not amend the Articles of Confederation, which is what they were sent there to do, but to write an entirely new Constitution, because they recognized very early that the Articles of Confederation needed significant reworking to the point of coming up with a new Constitution.
There were political figures of that time whose names we know today.
Two of the members of the Constitutional Convention became presidents of the United States, George Washington and James Madison. Two of the leading lights, the second and third presidents of the United States, were not there. Interestingly enough, John Adams, who became the second president, was ambassador to Great Britain in 1787, and Thomas Jefferson was ambassador to France. The members of the convention were the leading lights of the states that they represented. Among those who I think were recognized as major contributors to the Constitutional Convention and the end product were Gouverneur Morris from Pennsylvania, who was given the credit for drafting the final draft of the Constitution, and as one of the members of what was called the Committee on Style, clearly had a major role in bringing together the disparate resolutions and disparate parts that had been presented to the convention.
Some other contributors are mostly anonymous.
James Wilson, also from Pennsylvania, considered one of the brightest, and perhaps the brightest, of the members of the Constitutional Convention, was instrumental in, before the product was presented to Wilson's committee, the Committee on Style, bringing things together on what was called the Committee of Detail. There were no substantive committees in the sense that we think of them, like a committee to consider the executive in a branch and a committee to consider the judiciary, a committee to consider the legislative branch. They met as a group, as a committee of the whole, and discussed matters as a committee of the whole. Benjamin Franklin was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention, the only one in his 80s. There were several in their 60s, but by and large, this was a young group, many in their 40s and a number in their 30s. Alexander Hamilton was a important delegate, although he didn't attend a whole lot of the convention. He gave his great speech on June 18, 1787, as to what he thought the government ought to look like, and then I think became frustrated at the slow pace, or what he considered to be the slow pace of what was going on, and retreated to New York. there were 55 men who were part of the Constitutional Convention, but at any one time there were considerably fewer than 55 at the convention, and the average attendance throughout that summer, except at the beginning and at the end, was somewhere in the 30s. They did their business in Philadelphia in secrecy, and were able to maintain the secrecy.
Americans tend to think of the Founding Fathers, or the drafters of the Constitution, as truly wise men, almost like gods, who, in the words of the preamble, wanted to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. But be aware that our continental leaders were also politicians with definite points of view as to the direction of this new country. What we say here may be oversimplified, but it seems there were three basic camps. Keep in mind that political parties did not yet exist. On one end, we had Alexander Hamilton, a Federalist. He wanted a very strong central government and a powerful president. On the other end, we had Thomas Jefferson, whose views and actions were often confusing, but who favored stronger state governments and a strong Congress. And somewhere in the middle was James Madison, who favored a good balance.